In the remote village of Mbeka, silence was never empty. It was filled with whispers, the kind that floated between the trees, rode on the smoke of burning wood, and curled around the faces of those who listened. Mbeka sat at the edge of a great forest, a place untouched by the outside world. The people there lived by old laws, the kind written not in ink but in ash. Every household had its own clay bowl of ashes resting beside the doorway, taken from the sacred fires of the ancestors. It was believed that within those gray flakes slept the memories of the dead, their wisdom, their warnings, their watching eyes. To touch the ash was to speak to the past. To misuse it was to awaken it. When someone in Mbeka died, the villagers gathered at night, their faces painted with ash. They danced in slow, circling steps around the fire until the flames died down and the smoke thickened, rising like spirits into the moonlight. The ashes were then collected carefully, stored in gourds, and mixed into markings drawn upon the forehead of the family members. It was not mere decoration, it was communion. The dead were said to see through the living for 7 nights, guiding them, guarding them, or if wronged, haunting them. Children were taught early that ash was sacred. Never breathe on it, never scatter it, and never mock it, the elders would say, their voices trembling with the weight of old warnings. To break that rule was to invite the eyes of the forgotten, eyes that never closed. The story of those eyes was told only in hushed tones around dying fires. It was said that long ago, before the river changed its course and the forest swallowed the old paths, a family had used the sacred ash to decorate masks for a festival. They had danced for vanity, not remembrance. That night, their eyes had turned gray as the dust they mocked, and in the morning, the villagers found the masks staring from the ground, filled with watching ash. In Mbeka, even laughter carried caution. The wind itself seemed to listen, curling around huts of woven straw and clay, carrying the smell of smoke and earth. The air was heavy with reverence, for the ancestors, for the soil, for the balance between life and death. Even weddings were shadowed by ash. Brides and grooms knelt before the sacred bowl, marking each other's brows to promise they would live and die in remembrance. Every moment of joy was tied to sorrow, every birth a reminder of decay. It was not a place where one forgot easily. The forest around Mbeka was thick and alive with sound. Cicadas droned like restless spirits, and owls watched from the high trees, their eyes glimmering like fragments of the dead. The villagers said the forest and the ash were one. Both breathed, both remembered. Those who wandered too far often returned with blackened hands and no memory of what they had touched. Others did not return at all. Yet amid this quiet fear was beauty, the glow of evening fires, the rhythm of hands pounding grain, the hum of songs that had no beginning or end. The people of Mbeka lived between reverence and dread, between love for their ancestors and terror of awakening them. They believed their peace depended on obedience to the old rites. Every grain of ash was treated as sacred dust from creation itself, a bridge between the living and the dead. When the wind blew strong, it carried fine trails of gray through the air, dusting everything, the trees, the rivers, the faces of children. They said it was the ancestors reminding them, softly, that they were still watching. But in the stillness of the night, when the fires dimmed and only the faint glow of the ashes remained, some swore they saw movement in that grayness, the shape of eyes forming, blinking, and fading again. In Mbeka, fear was faith. The people did not question why the world worked as it did, only that it demanded respect. To be born there was to inherit 1,000 unseen gazes, to live beneath the weight of memory. The ashes of the dead lay in every hearth, every corner, every prayer. And though the villagers bowed to the sacred bowls each morning, none dared wonder what would happen if the ash itself ever chose to remember something, or someone new. Because deep down they all knew, ash never truly sleeps. It only waits for a reason to open its eyes again. Amara was unlike anyone in Mbeka. While others walked softly around the sacred, she moved through it as if it were a part of her. Her hands, always gentle and sure, had touched more death than most elders could bear to remember. She worked at the burial grounds beyond the village, where the earth was soft and the scent of burning herbs hung thick in the air. From dawn until the last ember of dusk, she cleaned the bodies of the departed, washing away the dust, smoothing their hair, and painting their brows with ash in quiet devotion. To Amara, death was not something to fear. It was a returning, like the setting sun that promised light again. When she looked upon the faces of the dead, she did not see emptiness. She saw stories, mothers who had once sung, children who had once played by the river, hunters who had once shouted into the wind. She whispered to them as she worked, her voice calm and tender. "Rest well," she would say, brushing the ash across their eyelids. "The earth remembers you." But not everyone in Mbeka saw her tenderness as a gift. Some whispered that Amara stayed too long among the dead, that she listened to things no living person should hear. They said her eyes gleamed strangely in the firelight, as if reflecting unseen faces. The spirits follow her home, old women murmured when she passed. They cling to her shadow like dust. Amara heard the whispers, but she did not flinch. Her curiosity about life, and what lay beyond it, had always set her apart. Since childhood, she had asked questions no one dared to answer. "Why must we cover the dead in ash?" she once asked her grandmother. "If it is to honor them, why must they be hidden?" Her grandmother's response was always the same, because seeing too much invites eyes that never close. Still, Amara could not stop wondering. She believed that the customs, while sacred, had become chains of fear. "If the ancestors truly love us," she told her friend Moyo one evening, "why would they curse us for seeking to understand them?" Moyo only shook his head, his gaze darting to the horizon where smoke from the burial fires coiled into the sky. "Because love and power are not the same, Amara," he said softly. Her hut stood near the edge of the forest, where the burial grounds met the whispering trees. At night, the wind rustled the leaves like murmuring voices, and the air shimmered with floating ash. Most villagers feared that place, but Amara found peace there. Sometimes she sang to the wind, low, mournful tunes her mother had taught her before passing away. The notes carried softly into the dark, like threads reaching for the unseen. Inside her home, clay bowls of sacred ash sat neatly on shelves. Yet Amara treated them differently. She would speak to them kindly before sleep, thanking the ancestors for their watch, but also asking them to rest. "You have seen enough," she would whisper. "Close your eyes for a while." Some nights, she dreamed that they listened, that the ashes stirred faintly in reply. Her compassion extended beyond the burial ground. She cared for children who lost parents to sickness, often sharing her meager food with them. "The living need tending too," she'd say when scolded by elders who believed she was neglecting ritual order. Yet her kindness only deepened the unease around her. People began to avoid her path, afraid of bringing spirits into their homes. Still, there were moments when even the fearful could not deny her grace. When the chief's wife lost her newborn, it was Amara who prepared the tiny body, humming softly until dawn. The chief himself had wept at her gentleness, though he never spoke her name afterward, as if gratitude might awaken something he could not control. In her quiet heart, Amara carried questions the world of Mbeka refused to answer. What if the ash did not belong to the dead but to the living, a reminder of their own decay? What if the ancestors longed not for worship, but release? These thoughts followed her like ghosts, shaping her dreams and haunting her silence. Each morning, as she walked through the burial grounds with her basket of herbs and cloths, she would pause by the great communal well, the same one used to mix the ritual ashes. The water shimmered darkly, reflecting the sky's pale face. "Do you see what they do?" she would whisper to the reflection. "Do you remember who we are?" The wind would answer in soft sighs, stirring the ash along the rim of the well. And sometimes, just for a heartbeat, she thought she saw movement beneath the surface, a faint flicker like an eye opening and closing again. Amara would look away then, her heart trembling but her mind unyielding. She was the girl who cared for the forgotten, who cleaned the dead with love instead of fear, and perhaps that was why the dead had begun to listen back. When Amara's father died, the house that had once been filled with quiet laughter and the smell of roasted maize grew heavy with bitterness. Mama Kuda, his second wife, moved through it like a storm, her bangles clinking with every step, her voice sharp enough to slice through air. She was not cruel because she was poor or lonely, she was cruel because she saw in Amara something she could never possess: peace. Amara tried to mourn in silence, lighting small candles beside the hearth each night, whispering blessings to the spirit of her father. But Mama Kuda would slam the door, shouting, "Enough of your muttering, girl. The dead have their place and so do you." The woman's eyes glittered with envy whenever she saw Amara kneel in grace, her movements gentle even in grief. The villagers often came to check on the orphan girl, offering baskets of millet and jugs of milk. They pitied her, but they also admired her. She never complained, never spoke ill of her stepmother, and continued to care for the burial grounds as she always had. Children waved to her as she passed. Elders called her Child of the Ash, half in reverence, half in superstition. To Mama Kuda, each greeting felt like a stone thrown at her pride. "She makes them pity her," Mama Kuda muttered to her friend Senga, the weaver, one morning at the market. "She wants to seem holy, to stand above us all." Senga shrugged. "The spirits favor those who respect them. Maybe the ancestors truly guide her hands." That only deepened Mama Kuda's resentment. "Guide her hands?" she hissed. She desecrates them. She touches sacred ash without permission, pretends she knows the will of the ancestors. I've seen her talking to the wind like a witch. And so the whispers began. They slithered through the narrow alleys of Mbeka like smoke, poisonous and invisible. She steals power from the dead, one villager murmured. She traps souls in those clay bowls, said another. The tales twisted and grew until Amara's kindness became suspicion, her calm became arrogance, and her connection to the burial grounds became a curse. Mama Kuta fanned the flames with every word she spoke. She told the priest of ash that Amara had mixed her own dust with that of the ancestors. She claimed to have seen her chanting under the moonlight, her eyes glowing with unnatural light. Even when proof was asked, Mama Kuta smiled and said, "Proof? The wind itself carries her crimes." Amara heard the gossip but said nothing. She still prepared the dead with care, still greeted her stepmother respectfully, even as she endured slaps and insults at home. "You think you're better than me?" Mama Kuta would snarl, throwing water at the floor Amara had just cleaned. "You think the ancestors love you more?" But Amara's silence only enraged her further. It was not defiance but a quiet strength, a power that needed no words. When Mama Kuta's cooking pot cracked, she blamed Amara. When her roof leaked during a storm, she spat and said, "The witch sings again." Even the neighbors began avoiding Amara's hut, fearful that the stepmother's hatred might invite misfortune. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Mama Kuta watched Amara walk to the burial grounds with her basket of herbs. The girl's white dress fluttered like a whisper against the dying light. For a moment, jealousy twisted into something darker, fear. Fear of how effortlessly the world seemed to love her. Fear that even the dead might listen to her voice before hers. "She will not outshine me," Mama Kuta said under her breath. "The village will see what she truly is." The next morning she gathered ashes from her own hearth, black and bitter, and scattered them before the temple gate. "The girl has angered the ancestors," she told the priest loudly. "She touches their dust without prayer, mocks their silence and keeps their power for herself." The priest frowned, troubled but uncertain. Yet by evening the rumor had spread like wildfire. Mothers pulled their children away when Amara passed. Merchants refused her coins. The same villagers who once called her blessed now called her cursed. Amara returned home that night with her basket half full, her eyes lowered. She found the door barred. Mama Kuta stood on the other side, her face lit by firelight. "No witch sleeps under my roof," she declared. "Your father's mercy died with him." Amara did not cry. She only whispered a prayer to her father's spirit, asking for strength. Then she turned away, walking back toward the burial grounds, her only home left. The wind rose as she walked, carrying with it a faint murmur that brushed against Mama Kuta's ear. It sounded like a sigh, or a warning. That night, the ashes in every bowl across Mbeka shifted restlessly, as if something within them had awakened. The morning came heavy with mist, thick as grief, hanging low over Mbeka. The drums beat softly, not in celebration but in warning, a rhythm that traveled through every heart. Amara stood in the center of the gathering ground, her wrists bound with woven grass, her eyes wide not with fear but disbelief. Around her, the villagers formed a trembling circle. Their faces were painted with ash and sorrow, their gazes heavy with judgment they didn't fully understand. The child's sickness had frightened them, the fever, the whispers, the way the boy had called out names of the dead in his sleep. To them it could only mean one thing: the balance between the living and the ancestors had been disturbed. Mama Kuta stood near the front, her expression grave and righteous. She clutched a calabash filled with sacred ash, her fingers trembling with false piety. "The ancestors must be appeased," she said, her voice rising above the low hum of the drums. "Someone has brought impurity to the soil of the dead. The ash remembers all. Let it reveal the truth." Her words were laced with venom, but coated in sanctity. The elders nodded slowly, torn between doubt and dread. The sickness of a child was not to be taken lightly, and Amara's closeness to the burial grounds made her an easy mark. Amara wanted to speak, to defend herself, but her voice caught in her throat. She searched the crowd for a single friendly face, but found none. Fear had swallowed friendship whole. Her knees weakened beneath her, not from guilt but from the weight of isolation. She tried to meet Mama Kuta's gaze, silently asking why. But the stepmother looked away, her lips twisting into a thin, satisfied line. The head elder, Baba Noni, stepped forward with his staff carved from lightning wood. His voice was deep and weary. "The rite of ash is not for the innocent," he said. "It burns what is false and reveals what is hidden. If she is pure, the ancestors will protect her. If she is not, he did not finish the sentence. Everyone knew the end of that saying, the guilty never rise again. Two women approached Amara and tore away her headscarf. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders, tangled with dust and tears. They began to paint her face with streaks of ash, whispering prayers that trembled like leaves in a storm. The air thickened with the smell of burning herbs and crushed bones. Every mark they drew felt heavier, as if each stroke sealed her fate further. When they finished, Mama Kuta stepped closer, her hands trembling in mock sorrow. "You have walked where only the dead should walk," she declared. "You have touched what should not be touched. The ancestors will decide if you are worthy to live among us." Then she lifted the calabash high and poured the ash over Amara's face. It fell like gray rain, cold and final, coating her skin, clinging to her lashes. The world turned dim behind the veil of soot. A murmur ran through the villagers as Amara stood motionless, her face completely hidden under layers of ash. "Now," said Baba Noni, "she must be left at the burial ground until dawn. If the spirits forgive her, she will return. If not, she will become one of them." The crowd began to disperse, avoiding her eyes, whispering that perhaps it was for the best. Children were pulled away quickly, and torches flickered as the light faded from the sky. Two men led Amara toward the edge of the forest, where the burial mounds lay beneath the great baobab trees. They tied her to a wooden post at the edge of the clearing, leaving her in silence among the graves. The air was cold and dry, the wind carried faint voices, or perhaps it was only the trees. She closed her eyes, feeling the sting of the ash seeping into her skin. Somewhere deep within, something ancient stirred, not fear, not pain, but a low hum that resonated with the earth beneath her feet. In the distance, lightning flickered behind clouds that had not wept for months. The ground shifted slightly as if the ancestors were turning in their sleep. Mama Kuta, watching from afar, smiled faintly, believing she had finally silenced the girl who saw too much. But she did not see how the ashes on Amara's face began to shimmer faintly under the moonlight, or how a soft pulse of energy rippled through the graves like breath returning to a long-dead body. The rite of ash had begun, but the spirits were not following the will of the living. The drums began as the sun fell, their slow, heavy rhythm echoing across the hills of Mbeka. The entire village gathered near the sacred pit, a deep hollow encircled by stones blackened from centuries of ritual fire. Shadows lengthened across the clearing as torches were raised, their flames wavering in the rising wind. In the center stood the stone altar, cold, ancient, and etched with spirals of ash. Upon it lay Amara, her wrists bound with reed cords, her face streaked with soot and fear. The earth beneath her felt alive, humming faintly, as if waiting for something it had forgotten how to name. Mama Kuta stepped forward, her white robes glinting with the reflection of fire. Her face was painted like a skull, a mark of the living communing with the dead. In her hands she carried the sacred calabash filled with ancestral ash, the same one she had lifted when condemning Amara. The crowd watched in reverent silence, though unease lingered in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. The elders stood nearest to the altar, whispering old prayers, their voices trembling. This was not a rite they performed often. It was a ritual meant to cleanse darkness, not to test innocence. Baba Noni raised his staff and spoke, his voice breaking through the murmurs. "Let the ashes of the ancestors weigh the truth. Let them open their eyes upon her soul and see what we cannot." He looked down at Amara with a flicker of sorrow that he quickly hid. "If she is guilty, the earth will take her. If she is pure, the ancestors will leave her untouched." The villagers began to chant, a haunting melody that wound through the night like smoke. Ash to breath, breath to silence, silence to dust, and dust to truth. Their voices rose and fell, growing louder as Mama Kuta lifted the calabash higher. She looked down at Amara, her lips curving in cruel satisfaction. "Let the ashes speak," she said and tilted the gourd. The ash poured over Amara's face in thick gray streams, coating her skin, filling the creases of her eyelids, the corners of her lips. It fell like a shroud, dry and suffocating. She tried to gasp, but the powder invaded her breath, scratching her throat like sand. Her heart pounded as her body twisted against the bindings, but no one moved to help. The chanting grew louder, rhythmic, fevered, as if the crowd had fallen into a trance. The world narrowed to the burning of her lungs and the weight of centuries pressing down on her. The torches flickered wildly. Sparks leapt into the air and were swallowed by the darkness above. Somewhere in the distance, thunder muttered faintly, though no rain clouds were visible. Mama Kuta's hand shook as she emptied the last of the ash. For a brief moment she thought she saw something in it, a flicker of light like eyes opening. But when she blinked it was gone. Amara's breathing slowed. The chants became muffled as though she were sinking into the earth itself. Her world turned gray then black. She felt cold seep into her bones. The air was heavy still. Time lost meaning. In the final breath before everything went silent, she thought she heard whispers, not of the villagers but of something beneath her. Voices as old as the soil. They called her name, not with anger but with sorrow. "She does not belong here," one voice murmured. "She carries our sight," said another. "The living have blinded her. We will open her again." The world faded. When Mama Kuta turned to face the crowd, she lifted her arms dramatically. "It is done," she cried. "The ancestors have taken her silence as payment. May peace return to Mbeka." The villagers responded with a fearful chorus of approval. To them Amara was gone, purified or punished. Her body lay still on the altar, her face hidden beneath a mask of gray dust. No breath stirred her chest. Baba Noni approached and placed a trembling hand on her wrist. "Nothing." He closed his eyes and nodded to the men beside him. "The will of the ancestors has spoken. Bury her before the moon sets." The villagers moved in grim procession. They carried Amara's limp body to the sacred pit, a circular hollow ringed by bones of those who had died in similar rites generations before. They lowered her gently, covering her in layers of ash-soaked soil. The scent of burning herbs filled the night as the people murmured their final prayers. Each handful of dirt sounded like a drumbeat as it fell, soft yet final. Mama Kuta watched, her expression calm but her heart drumming with unease. For all her plotting, something about the ritual unsettled her. The air felt charged, the earth restless. As the last of the ashes was scattered over the pit, a gust of wind tore through the clearing, blowing out several torches. The darkness that followed seemed to breathe. The villagers gasped, clutching one another. Baba Noni raised his staff again, voice trembling. "The ancestors have accepted her," he said quickly, forcing authority into his tone. "Go home. The ritual is complete." Slowly the people dispersed, leaving behind the still pit under the indifferent gaze of the moon. Mama Kuta lingered a moment longer, her hand gripping the empty calabash. The ashes clung to her fingers, refusing to fall away. Below the ground, in the silence of the sacred pit, Amara's body lay motionless. But beneath the ash covering her face, something stirred. The faintest shimmer of light pulsed beneath her skin, not warmth, not fire, but awareness. The whispers returned, wrapping around her like smoke. "They have buried your sight," they said. "But we will give you eyes that never close again." Outside, the wind rose into a howl. The ashes that covered the burial mound began to tremble, shifting as though breathing with her. And in the distance, thunder answered, a sound like the ancestors awakening from a long sleep. The night after the rite of ash was unlike any other in Becca's memory. The air hung heavy, thicker than smoke, and the wind carried a sound that wasn't quite a whisper and not quite a cry, something between breath and memory. The villagers lay restless in their huts, their dreams tangled with unease. Dogs whimpered. The torches outside the temple flickered even though there was no storm. And deep within the sacred pit where Amara's body rested, something began to stir. The ashes that blanketed her face shifted with the faint rhythm of breath, though her chest did not rise. Slowly, impossibly, the gray dust shimmered. Each grain began to glow faintly, like dying embers rekindling. Then, beneath the veil of ash, patterns emerged, soft, rounded shapes forming upon her brow and cheeks. They were eyes. Not of flesh, but of light and ash combined, faintly pulsing, open though her body lay still. The earth trembled. The ash eyes blinked once and a low hum echoed through the soil. From far above, the villagers heard it, a sound that traveled like wind through stone rippling across the ground. Some thought it was thunder, others said it was the ancestors speaking. But the elders, their bones aching with fear, knew this was no ordinary sign. The spirits had been disturbed. In his hut, Baba Noni awoke with a start. His wooden charms clattered from the shelf as the air turned cold. He stumbled outside, gripping his staff, and saw the impossible. The burial pit was glowing. Not brightly but with a deep, pulsing light, like something beneath the surface was alive. He dropped to his knees, his old heart pounding. "Ancestors," he whispered, "what have we done?" From every corner of Mbeka, doors opened. Faces emerged from the dark, eyes wide and frightened. The people gathered in silence, drawn to the strange light like moths to flame. Mama Kuta stood among them, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Her mouth was dry, her thoughts racing. She had seen strange things before, Omens, shadows, dreams, but never this. Never the earth itself glowing where she had buried her stepdaughter. The ground began to tremble again, softly at first, then stronger. Dust rose in swirls, shaping faint forms, outlines of faces that vanished as soon as they appeared. Whispers floated through the air, layered and overlapping voices that seemed to come from under the soil. Amara, they called. Amara. Children began to cry. The women held them close, praying under their breath. Baba Noni's staff struck the ground, and he raised his voice over the growing hum. "Return to your homes," he ordered. "Do not speak the names of the dead tonight." But no one moved. The glow from the pit spread outward in slow, trembling waves, illuminating the clearing. The ash on the surface shimmered like silver dust, swirling into faint spirals. Then out of the pit, a gust of wind burst forth, cold, sharp, filled with the scent of burnt earth. The torches scattered around the clearing blew out at once. The villagers screamed as the darkness closed in, broken only by the eerie shimmer from below. And then they saw it. The ashes began to rise, grain by grain, as if drawn upward by invisible fingers. They lifted into the air, gathering above the pit like a gray storm. Within that floating haze, dozens of faint eyes appeared, blinking, watching, reflecting torchlight that was no longer there. The people fell to their knees, weeping, whispering prayers. Mama Kuta stumbled backward. "No," she gasped. "No, this cannot be." But even as she denied it, the wind twisted around her, carrying faint echoes, voices that spoke her name. Not once but many times. "Kuta. Kuta." The sound came from everywhere, the ground, the air, the trees. It wasn't angry but sorrowful, as though every injustice whispered through the centuries had joined the wind tonight. She covered her ears but it made no difference. The sound wasn't something she could block, it lived inside her bones. Across the village, clay pots rattled, doors swung open, and the old masks hanging on the temple walls began to tilt and fall. Even the well water shimmered, rippling though no one touched it. The ancestors were awake. Baba Noni fell to his knees beside the pit. "Forgive us," he whispered, voice trembling. "We have buried truth under lies. We have blinded innocence with ash." He pressed his forehead to the earth as the glowing pit pulsed once more, brighter, stronger, and the eyes in the air turned toward him. Then came the voices again, layered and echoing, not only Amara's but hundreds of others, the silenced, the wronged, the forgotten. They spoke through the dust, their tones soft yet unyielding. "The eyes of ash see what the living hide. The eyes of ash do not close. The truth buried in darkness will find its breath." The villagers clung to one another, trembling. The sound of the earth's heartbeat grew louder, rhythmic, powerful, until it merged with the wind, forming a song. A low, haunting melody that had no words, yet carried every emotion: pain, love, forgiveness, fury. And through it all, Mama Kuta stood paralyzed, tears streaking down her sooty cheeks. She could see them now, faint faces forming in the swirling ash, one of them unmistakably Amara's. Her eyes glowed brighter than the rest, not cruel but knowing. "Mother," the voice came softly, not from the air but from within her mind. "You took my breath but not my sight. You buried me but the earth remembered." Mama Kuta fell to her knees, her body shaking as the ashes drifted down, circling her like gentle snowfall. The ground began to calm, the glowing pit slowly dimming, though its faint light lingered in the shape of eyes across its surface, open, watching. When dawn approached, the villagers found themselves too afraid to move, too awestruck to speak. The trembling had ceased, the whispers gone. But when the first sunlight touched the burial pit, the ash still shimmered faintly, etched with dozens of open eyes, proof that what they had seen was no dream. And though the village returned to uneasy quiet, one truth settled deep in every heart: the eyes beneath the ash were still watching. And until justice rose from the pit, they would never close again. The moon hung heavy above Mbeka that night, its pale light struggling to break through the smoke and mist that clung to the land. The village was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence that comes with sleep, but the kind that waits, holding its breath. Even the insects, those tireless singers of the night, were still. The air smelled of soot and damp earth, and deep beneath the sacred pit, the ashes began to move once more. A soft hum rippled through the soil, a low vibration that made the nearby trees quiver. From the pit came the faintest sound of breathing. Then a crack. The earth itself seemed to sigh. Slowly, a pale hand broke through the surface, fingers coated in gray dust. Another hand followed, trembling but determined. The soil shifted and fell away, and out of the sacred pit rose Amara. Her hair, once black and smooth, was now streaked with silver ash. Her skin glowed faintly under the moonlight, and her face was no longer what it had been. The ashes had not merely covered her, they had become a part of her, fused into her very flesh. Where her cheeks and forehead once were smooth, there were now countless gray eyes, blinking softly, glowing with faint light like dying stars. Some eyes wept tears of light that slid down her face and vanished into the ground. Others remained still, their gaze turned toward the world, unblinking. She did not breathe. She did not speak. But the air around her trembled with awareness, as though the night itself recognized her return. The ashes that had buried her now lifted from the ground and floated in slow spirals around her body, shimmering like a veil. Each grain of ash seemed alive, whispering fragments of forgotten words, apologies, cries, confessions, all the voices of the ancestors who had seen her suffering and awakened to it. Amara's bare feet touched the cold earth, and she began to walk. Her steps were soundless, yet with every footfall, the ground seemed to pulse faintly, as if her presence revived something buried deep beneath. The first to see her was a shepherd boy, awake by the edge of the village tending to a sick goat. When he turned and saw her emerging from the darkness, he dropped his lantern. The flames sputtered out, leaving only the silver glow of her eyes. His lips parted, a scream caught in his throat, but Amara raised her hand and instantly he fell silent. She gazed at him, and in the reflection of her many eyes, he saw not her, but himself. He saw every lie he had told, every time he'd stolen milk from the village pot, every moment of cruelty he thought forgotten. He fell to his knees, weeping, begging for forgiveness. But Amara said nothing. She simply turned and walked on, her eyes closing one by one as she passed, until only a faint light trailed behind her. In the chief's courtyard, dogs began to howl, their fur rising as they caught the scent of ash. The sound woke the guards who rushed outside, only to freeze as they saw her standing at the edge of the firelight. Her presence was both terrifying and beautiful, divine and haunting. "Who goes there?" one guard shouted, voice trembling. But before he could take a step closer, the fire in the courtyard flickered and turned gray. Ash drifted down like snow, and from its glow, Amara's eyes opened again. The guards dropped their weapons. In her reflection, they saw the faces of those they had wronged. The poor farmers they had beaten, the women they had mocked, the secrets they thought buried. One man screamed and ran, only to stumble as the earth seemed to rise and swallow his footsteps in silence. Amara walked past them. The firelight clung to her form like a halo of dust, and each time one of her eyes blinked, the world around her seemed to shimmer between this life and something older, deeper, a world of spirits. She entered the village square and the people began to wake. Doors creaked open, lamps flickered to life, and fearful whispers filled the air. "It's her," someone said. "It's the girl they buried." "It's Amara," cried another. But the elders said nothing. They only fell to their knees, bowing their heads to the ground. Mama Kuda emerged from her hut last, her face pale and eyes wide. She had dreamt this moment, seen flashes of ash and eyes in her sleep, but never believed it could come true. Now, standing in the trembling light of her daughter's rebirth, she could no longer deny it. Amara turned her gaze toward her stepmother. The eyes upon her face opened wider, glowing brighter, until the light painted the whole village in silver and shadow. Mama Kuda staggered backward, clutching her chest. "No," she whispered. "You should not be here. You were buried." But the eyes of Ash did not blink. "Look at me," she cried, though she already was. And in that moment, her own reflection appeared in every one of Amara's eyes, not her body as it was, but as her soul truly looked. Dark, shriveled, wrapped in lies and fear. Around her flickered scenes she had buried, the moment she had spread false stories, the joy she felt when Amara was condemned, the satisfaction of control. "No!" Mama Kuda screamed. "Stop. I can't." But Amara did not move. Her silence was judgment enough. The wind rose around her, scattering ash into the air, and the people of Mbeka fell to their knees. The sound that followed was not thunder but something deeper, a vibration of truth passing through every heart. Every guilty soul saw their reflection in those gray eyes. Every secret wound reopened. The liars, the greedy, the cruel, each felt as if the earth itself had turned its gaze upon them. Some screamed, some wept, and some whispered prayers, but none could escape what the eyes revealed. And then, as the moon reached its highest point, Amara's steps slowed. She turned her face toward the sky, the eyes upon her cheeks shimmering like stars. For a moment all of Mbeka was still. Then she closed her eyes, all of them, and a single tear of light fell to the ground. Where it touched, the soil bloomed with white lilies, flowers of ash reborn as life. The wind sighed, and the ashes that surrounded her began to settle. The villagers watched in awe as the glow faded, leaving only Amara's human eyes once more, weary but alive. She looked upon the people, her expression both sorrowful and serene, then turned toward the horizon. Without a word, she walked into the darkness beyond the village, leaving behind the silent truth. No lie, no cruelty, and no injustice ever stays buried forever. The eyes of Ash had seen, and would never close again. Mama Kuta had not slept since the night the wind began to whisper Amara's name. Every rustle of the palm leaves sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Her eyes were red and swollen from sleeplessness, and her hands trembled as she poured water into a calabash to wash her face. But as she leaned over it, she froze. The water rippled on its own, though no breeze stirred the room. And from the center of the trembling circle, two gray eyes opened, calm, unblinking, and familiar. Amara's eyes. Mama Kuta screamed and flung the calabash against the wall. The water splashed across the floor, turning into a fine mist that whispered before fading away. Her heart pounded like a drum. She clutched her wrapper and stumbled outside, gasping for breath. The village was eerily quiet. Smoke from the evening fires curled upward, but no voices came from the huts. The silence was thick, heavy, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. She began to run. At every turn the world seemed to reflect her guilt. The clay pots by the well shimmered with ashen faces. The window panes flickered with gray eyes staring back at her. Even the puddles in the dirt roads glowed faintly, showing her reflection wrapped in shadows, her mouth whispering lies she had once told. She touched the sacred ash. She angered the ancestors. She brought sickness upon us. Each phrase echoed from nowhere, or perhaps everywhere. No, Mama Kuta whimpered, covering her ears. No, I only wanted. But her own voice betrayed her. The words twisted and changed in the air, becoming whispers that slithered into her mind. You wanted her gone. You wanted her forgotten. She stumbled into her hut, locking the wooden door behind her. The air inside was thick and cold. A single oil lamp flickered, throwing long shadows on the walls. Her breath came in ragged bursts. Then came the knock. Soft at first. Then louder. Then steady, like a heartbeat. Mama Kuta's legs weakened. The lamp sputtered. Slowly she turned toward the door. Through the thin cracks in the wood, she saw a faint light, not yellow like fire, but pale and shimmering like the moon reflected in ash. The door creaked open on its own. And there stood Amara. Her form was both human and something beyond, her skin dark and smooth, but her face glowed faintly under a veil of gray ash. Where her eyes once were, countless tiny eyes blinked and wept threads of light that ran down her cheeks like molten silver. Mama Kuta fell to her knees, trembling. Amara, my child, please. I didn't mean. Amara said nothing. She took a step forward, her bare feet silent against the earthen floor. Every small eye on her face blinked in unison, watching, not with anger but with sorrow. You lied, a voice whispered, not from Amara's mouth but from the air itself. It was as if the ashes spoke for her. Mama Kuta wept. I was jealous. You were loved and I was nothing after your father died. I thought if they hated you they would love me again. The eyes on Amara's face flickered. Then she reached out and gently touched Mama Kuta's forehead. The moment her fingers brushed the skin, Mama Kuta gasped. Her eyes widened as gray cracks began to spread across her face, like dry earth before rain. She clawed at her throat, but the cracks deepened, pouring fine ash from her mouth and nostrils. Her words crumbled into dust before they could form. Within moments her whole body turned still, her skin pale and grainy. The last thing she saw was Amara's sorrowful eyes, hundreds of them, closing slowly one by one. The hut filled with silence again. The oil lamp flickered once more, then went out completely. When the villagers found Mama Kuta's body the next morning, she was seated upright, her face serene but covered in ash. The wind carried faint whispers through the village, soft, almost kind. And far beyond the huts, on the edge of the sacred pit, Amara stood watching the sunrise. The ashes on her face no longer glowed. The eyes had closed as if her purpose was done. She turned her gaze toward the horizon, where light touched the land once more. The spirits were quiet now. Justice had been served. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the village in soft gold. The air was still, not the heavy, fearful stillness of the past nights, but a tender quiet, like the earth itself was breathing again. Amara stood at the edge of the sacred pit, her bare feet resting on cool soil. The ashes that once clung to her skin now shimmered faintly, breaking apart into tiny motes of silver dust that drifted upward with each breath of wind. Her eyes, all of them, were beginning to close. The voices of the spirits, once restless and crying for justice, were silent. The world felt new, weightless. She looked toward the village. From afar, smoke curled softly from the roofs, and the faint sounds of life began to stir. Roosters crowing, doors creaking open, mothers calling to their children. None yet knew that the curse had been lifted, that the woman they buried in fear had become their salvation. A small child was the first to step outside. The same child who had fallen ill, the one whose sickness had been blamed on her. The little girl lifted her face toward the sky and blinked. "Mama," she whispered, "the rain smells like flowers." The mother came out, astonished. The clouds above glowed with silver streaks, and a soft rain began to fall, not heavy but warm and gentle, like a blessing. The drops glimmered faintly as they touched the earth, leaving trails of light on every leaf and rooftop. In the fields, withered crops began to lift their heads. Green returned to the cassava plants. The cracked soil softened. The air smelled of renewal, wet earth and the faint scent of ash, not as a reminder of death but of cleansing. The villagers gathered outside, looking at one another with wide, uncertain eyes. Someone whispered, "It is her, the girl of the ashes." And another answered, "No, it is her spirit, forgiving us." Amara watched them from the distance, her heart neither bitter nor proud. The countless eyes across her face shimmered softly, then began to fade one by one, each closing like a petal in the sun. She felt no pain, only release. The ashes that once bound her were now freeing her. The wind rose, lifting her hair around her face. Her body grew lighter, her outline blurring like smoke. As she dissolved into the air, the last of her eyes opened once more, a final gaze at the land she had loved, at the people who had feared her, at the world that was finally waking from its blindness. The wind carried her voice across the village, not in words but in a feeling. See clearly. Live gently. Remember the truth. And then she was gone. Only the ashes remained, spinning, sparkling, carried high into the sky. The rain thickened for a moment, silver drops falling faster, washing over huts, faces and fields. The villagers lifted their hands and let it touch them, each feeling something stir within, guilt melting, grief softening, understanding dawning. Elder Kumba, who had led the trial against her, fell to his knees in the mud. "Forgive us," he whispered, though the wind carried no reply. Only a warm gust brushed his cheek as if in answer. By midday the storm passed. The sun broke through, bright and strong. Children ran laughing through puddles, their reflections shining clearer than ever before. Women returned to the fields with new hope, and men repaired the broken fences and wells. That evening, when the sky deepened to gold and crimson, the villagers gathered near the sacred pit. They sang softly, not the chants of fear they once used but a song of peace. From that day they called the rain Amara's gift. Whenever the fields grew dry or hearts grew heavy, they would wait for her rain to fall, the gentle ash that healed, the light that revealed. And so, Amara became part of the dawn, the whisper in the morning breeze, the silver in the rain, the truth that washed away lies. Her story lingered in every drop, every breath of wind, reminding the living that even from ashes, light can rise again. Generations passed, and the story of Amara drifted into legend, carried on the winds that swept through the village of Mbeka. The people rebuilt their lives upon the soil once cursed by fear, but they never forgot the night the ashes glowed, nor the girl who rose from them. The elders would gather the children around the fires during long evenings and whisper, "Ash remembers the innocent." The words became a warning, a comfort, and a prayer. When the wind blew through the burial grounds, lifting faint gray dust into the air, villagers would bow their heads. They said it was Amara walking among them, her countless eyes open still, watching over those who lived in truth and exposing those who hid behind deceit. In time her story shaped their customs. No one poured ash carelessly anymore. No one mocked the burial rites or accused another without proof. Mothers taught their children that every handful of ash held memory, of fire, of loss, of eyes that once wept light. They told them that to lie was to invite the gaze of Amara, whose eyes never closed even in death. Some nights, the wind carried strange murmurs through the village, soft, almost musical, like the breath of a woman sighing across the rooftops. The old would nod knowingly, saying, "She walks tonight." Others would look into their bowls of water and swear they saw faint reflections staring back, gray eyes shimmering before vanishing into ripples. Travelers who passed through Mbeka spoke of an uncanny peace that lingered in the air. The village was known for its honesty. No thief, no liar could live long there without feeling watched. The markets thrived, yet even in trade, every exchange was made with open palms and steady eyes. It was said that deceit could not hide under Amara's sky. The burial grounds became sacred. Once feared, now they were places of reverence. Villagers brought flowers and left them near the pit where Amara had once lain, though no one knew the exact spot. During the annual rains, when the ash turned to soft gray mud, some claimed they could see faint prints, as if barefoot steps had passed through, never sinking, only gliding. Children, wide-eyed and trembling with both fear and awe, would whisper stories in the dark. They said that if you told a lie at night, you'd wake to find your reflection covered in a dusting of silver ash. Some said they'd seen her shadow walking at dawn, moving between huts, tall, silent, her face hidden in light, but with 1,000 eyes glowing faintly where her tears had once been. Elders never denied it. Instead, they'd smile softly and say, "Truth has its guardian." One tale told of a man who returned to Mbeka after many years, rich and proud, but filled with deceit. He mocked the stories and the faith of the people. That night, when the wind rose and the ashes stirred, he laughed at the old fears, until he looked into his fire and saw eyes staring back from the flames. The next morning he was gone. Only a patch of gray ash remained on the floor where he had stood. And so, the legend deepened. Amara became more than a memory, she became the conscience of Mbeka, the whisper in the wind that urged the living toward truth. Her eyes, once a curse of pain, became symbols of eternal vigilance and justice. Even now, when storms pass and the rain carries faint specks of ash, the villagers lift their faces and let it touch their skin. They believe it is her blessing, her way of reminding them that truth, like her eyes, never sleeps. As night falls and the fires fade, the elders tell the youngest once more, "Never lie beneath the open sky." For the ash remembers and Amara watches. Her eyes never close. And somewhere beyond the reach of the mortal world, in the hush between wind and rain, it is said that Amara smiles, her countless eyes glowing softly, forever awake, forever guarding the living from their own shadows.